And after today's session, we will make sure you get a copy of the presentation as well. So let's get right into it. Today's agenda. We are going to chat about considering a grant proposal, and what that will include is looking at the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So when I say NOFO, we mean Notice of Funding Opportunity. That is the grant notice that comes out. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at considering if it fits what you're looking for. We're going to talk about planning a proposal before you even get going to submit a grant. How do you start planning for that? We'll talk about budget development, relationships, and then what next? What do you do once you've kind of started this ball rolling for a grant proposal? So Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, that's the grant. First tip that I want to share with you is always make sure that you are looking at the right fit when you are considering applying for a grant. So in almost all grant scenarios I've ever come across, there is a requirement of who is eligible and what types of projects are eligible. It's usually not just a big giant pot of money that anything and everything can apply to use. So you want to know, who is this grant intended for? Who's eligible? What types of projects? Is it for local or municipal agencies? Is it for state agencies? Is there some sort of other political subdivision or census tract? So for example, here in New Hampshire, we had a couple years ago what they call the Culvert AOP, or Aquatic Organism Passage Grant. And the Culvert AOP program supported projects for the replacement, removal, and repair of culverts that could improve fish passage, specifically fish that were an, a, anadromous, I think is how you pronounce it, anadromous fish. Those are fish who are born in fresh water. They spend most of their lives in salt water. Then they go back to fresh water to spawn. So salmon, for instance, a salmon is an anadromous fish. And clearly, not every waterway in New Hampshire is going to have salmon in it. So that right there, that kind of identifying characteristic just came down to, do you have the right fish species in your area? And that's going to be a determining factor if this grant is applicable to you. Another example, our New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services just announced recently a funding opportunity for diesel vehicle replacements. And they've highlighted that there are a couple dozen priority towns that they would like to see the funding impact, as well as they shared with us that this particular diesel equipment replacement program is different than their standard clean diesel program, because they're looking at a different category of vehicles that are eligible. So for instance, off-road construction equipment, things like loaders, isn't eligible under this new pot of money, but other categories like plow and dump trucks, multi-purpose utility trucks, refuse trucks, those are the sort of vehicles that they're looking at. So if you're with our New Hampshire Public Works departments and you just kind of heard that, key into that. Lee's going to send out an email later today with a link to the DES webinar. I think that's happening tomorrow. But that's a pot of money that I would definitely encourage you to take a look at, particularly if you're in one of those focus towns. But again, if that was a grant that you're interested in, but the equipment you're looking to replace doesn't qualify, you're not in one of those focus towns, you might want to think about, is it worth spending my time preparing this grant? The other thing is, you don't want to cry wolf. We know the story of Peter and the wolf, and you don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste your team's time preparing for a grant. You don't want to waste the grant recipient or the reviewer's time looking at your proposal if it's just completely out of line with what they're looking to do. So you do want to spend some time finding the right fit. And we'll talk about some sources. The other thing is, don't just write a grant for the experience. And I can see why this would be tempting. And I have been there. So when I first started writing grants, I would try to stretch something so that it would fit. I would spend all this time thinking, okay, I've got a really great idea. I really want to see this funded. I think it can be so beneficial for the audience. So I'm going to try to mold it and fit it and make it fit that this grant program that I have found. And it just rarely, I can't think of a single situation where it's ever worked out for me. So if I wrote just for the experience, if I wrote just to try it because I wanted to get more familiar with grant writing, you're really going to be potentially wasting your time. You're kind of setting up a reputation with those funding agencies if you're going outside the box of what they're looking to fund. So you might be better to just save your time, save your professional credit with those people who are going to help you prepare the grant, and wait for the right funding opportunity to come along that aligns with what you want to accomplish, that aligns with what the granting agency wants to accomplish, so that you have a better path forward. The next tip is read the NOFO. So that's the Notice of Funding Opportunity. read it from cover to very last page. And then my suggestion, reread it again. And most of these NOFOs are not light reading. These are like, for instance, the SS4A, Safe Streets and Roads for All. I think that's 76 pages, that NOFO. That is not a quick read. That is a lot of reading, but you want to read it from start to end, and you want to do that really early. And then what I do on my second or third pass through, I start making notes in the comments. I start highlighting things that are applicable to me. I start making notes or questions for myself. I'm more of like a digital person, so I tend to just open it up in Adobe and pop my comments in for myself, keep a digital copy of it. If you like paper in hand, you can print that NOFO out and you can highlight and make your little notes in the margins, whatever is helpful. So you want to start to organize. You also want to, in addition to the NOFO, see what other documentation and resources and guidance the agency has put out. So for instance, with SS4A, again this year, USDOT has put out several supportive documents to help you understand the NOFO, to help you prepare for it. They have checklists, they have self-evaluation forms, they have all sorts of FAQs and information to really guide you through that NOFO process. So if there's any of that material that the agency has provided, take the time to read that, because don't reinvent the wheel. Don't start over and trying to understand what they want if they have already taken the time to try to provide that information for you. So read the NOFO, reread it, and then start making notes. This is one area that we will highlight when we start talking a bit about AI or artificial intelligence. I'll touch on that later a bit, but this is one area where AI can be really beneficial. And I have an example I can show you where I took a couple NOFOs, including the SS4A, the 76 pager, and I ran it through AI and I asked it to come up with a 2-page desk reference, the basics, the summary of what I need to think about for this grant. And it did a really nice job. So we'll chat about that shortly as well. But when you're reading that NOFO, you want to look for things like the deadlines. And we'll talk about deadlines shortly. When do things have to be postmarked? When do emails have to go in? You want to look at eligibility criteria. Again, who and what are eligible? Submission requirements. Are you going to be submitting forms, applications? Are there reports? Are there files or packets of information that you have to submit? And any other materials that you think will be helpful. So if it says you can have letters of recommendation, you can have commitment letters, you can have support letters, whatever it might be, you want to start to get a sense of what am I going to need to do, gather, provide for this particular grant. The other thing I recommend is review past funding decisions. And I will show you again an example of how AI might help you with this. I pulled a couple examples this morning where you can go out and you can look at, for this particular grant, like SS4A, what sort of projects have they funded in the past? What were the successful award recipients? What type of communities? What size communities? How much dollar value were their awards? What were the projects that they put forth that they received awarded funds for? So understanding past funding decisions can help you kind of start to corral your own ideas, your own projects into that category of, is this potentially the right fit? Am I likely to be successful before I invest my time in this? Or maybe am I asking for too much? Am I kind of off track on what their project scenarios are typically? So understand past funding decisions. Usually you can find this information pretty easily out there, what projects they have awarded if it's a repeat type of grant program. Always when you are writing a grant, your goal is to connect your project or your thing that you are writing a grant proposal for as a solution to a problem that the granting agency has and cares about. So you want to try to write to not only your audience, but also the granting agency's audience. So you want to think about, how can you connect what they want you to do with this idea that you have to share with them that you're asking for funding. A lot of these agencies that have grants, they put out those grant opportunities because they might not have the staff infrastructure or the geographical presence in kind of throughout the country to have the impact that they might want to have. So they have something they're passionate about. They have a strategic goal. They have things they want to get done and accomplish. They have the funding to do it perhaps, but they might not have the infrastructure. They might not have the people, the reach, the presence. So grants can help them further their mission, can help them to maintain the work that they want to have done under the passion and their mission by finding people who can take that money for them and go use it appropriately by their values, by their missions and goals. So this is when you're writing your grant, you want to be reasonable. You don't want to, again, just make it up just for the sake of making it up and try to stretch it so that it's kind of like, there's a little bit of truth in this being a connection, but you want to have a genuine connection. But just think about that. Why are they providing this funding? And how can I make sure I highlight how my request, if they fund my request, it's going to be a solution for a problem they care about, a solution to a problem that they're trying to solve. So be a problem solver, explain why it's a need. Also, think about explaining why you need their funds. Obviously, we all know everybody has financial needs. Very rarely do you come across, particularly in the municipal world, a municipal agency that's just overflowing with money and doesn't know what to do with it all. So there is a lot of need for certain projects out there. You're not the only agency that's going to be requesting funding. So you want to really think about, how do I communicate why I'm trying to encourage them to consider my project, consider my proposal? Have I already gone out and looked for some funding from another source? Was I unsuccessful in that? Maybe I've found some of my funding I need, but I need a little bit more over in this area. So make sure you're communicating that. What really makes you the selling point onto why they should consider your proposal over the others that they're getting. And we'll take a pause in just a moment for any questions, but feel free, if you've got questions meanwhile, pop them right into the chat pod and I'll make sure to come back to them. And then going back to that idea of taking notes, have a really clear plan before you get started. You want to lay out the roadmap to how you're going to develop this grant proposal. Who's going to be a part of it? Who do you need to gather information from? Are you going to need the support of your elected officials? Are you going to need your town administrator to sign off on things? Will you need to connect with your financial representative? Who's going to be a part of developing this? What role do they play? What documentation or information do you need? When do you need it by? How is it going to get submitted? So you want to put all of this into a plan. This is another way that AI, in my opinion, could be helpful in kind of helping you start to flesh out those ideas. So keep that in mind. And then due dates are just that. So I see Tamika's question there, so I'll pause for just a moment. I'm certainly not selling or recommending any particular program, but I did do I've done some AI webinars. I personally use ChatGPT. So that's just what I became familiar with. I know there are so many of them out there, Copilot, Gemini, and everybody kind of might have their favorite. There's some other ones constantly coming. I have found ChatGPT works for me, and we have done some webinars sharing how to use AI for public works. Big fan, big fan, personally, myself, for how I have been able to integrate AI like ChatGPT into work. And I would love to chat with anybody more about that. So definitely, there's a lot of opportunities to realize some time and efficiency savings. And if you're not using AI and you're thinking about it, I'd love to chat with you. But for me personally, ChatGPT, but others might be using other programs. And again, feel free to pop that info into the chat pod. I know I could always branch out a bit and explore the others and learn something too. So due dates are going to be just that. I have never, ever, ever come across a grant program where they will just extend the due date because you had a technical glitch, because your laptop with all of your materials just kind of blew up on a Friday afternoon and you got that black screen of death, or because you didn't get the financial reports on time, somebody got sick and they weren't able to get you the info you needed. Due dates are due dates, and very rarely are late applications, if ever, going to be accepted. So you need to always be working ahead. You need to notify everyone who's a part of your proposal what you're going to need from them, when you're going to need it, and stay on top of people. Life happens, things come up. We all know that. And child gets sick, or a vacation gets pushed around, or somebody's out unexpectedly from the office and you're trying to do multiple jobs. Life happens. So you want to plan for that and you want to be aware for that. So for instance, this year, the SS4A funding applications are due at 5 p.m. EDT, so Eastern, on June 26th. Last year, they had two different dates for funding applications to be due. This year, it's one date. So you want to always be reading the most current information and be working ahead. The other thing I would suggest too is, if at some point you feel like you're getting off track, and maybe you're getting so off track with that plan, that kind of accordion or domino effect of things just going wrong have kind of pushed you outside the zone where you are likely to get your grant proposal pulled together on time. Have some really thoughtful and strategic consideration at that point. Do we pause this effort? and pull this package back and kind of let everybody recover their time on my team who's working on it. I myself, as I'm working on it, or you yourself as you're working on it, is it a good investment of your time if you can kind of look ahead and predict we're going to be flurrying and racing towards that finish line, and we might not be done by the June 26th deadline. We're not going to be able to do the service that this grant proposal needs. Think about pausing. Look to, can we reapply for next year? Can we take this information and use it in a different way? And only you can make those decisions. But I just say that because I have certainly seen, even in my own self, where I have put others on the team, our sponsored program team at UNH or others, under a really tight deadline because something came up on my end, I'm falling behind, and now I'm kind of looking to them to pick up the pace on their end in a way that maybe might not be fair to the business. So you want to make sure if you start getting off track, if somebody else does, reconsider, is this timeline still reasonable for us, or are we kind of fighting against the tide? Think about what systems you have to access. And this is a big one, and it might not seem like a big one, but something like the SAM.gov, that's the federal government's system for entering grants for many cases. Not every grant proposal goes through SAM.gov. Not all of them go through ValidyVal or grants.gov. But for SS4A, I think this year, don't quote me on it, I haven't looked at the NOFA for this. I think you submit it through valid evaluation, but you have to have a unique entity identifier. And that's a number that you get from SAM.gov. So if your agency already has a UEI, a unique entity identifier, that's great. You might not have to go through this process, but if you do not have one, you would have to go through SAM.gov to go ahead and request and confirm that unique entity identifier. Everything I've read said it can take up to 30 days to get that unique entity identifier. So imagine the frustration if you're working diligently and your team's working and everybody's putting their all into getting a grant proposal ready. You're ready to go ahead and submit it through ValidaVal or wherever it has to go, but you don't have your unique entity identifier. There's a code that you don't have that's going to like pause your whole show. So this is why you want to really be early on saying, okay, how are we going to submit this? What are we going to need to have for information? What access are we going to have? And test it all. Test it all, because even something like this nasty little error that I got a few years ago can really sideline you from moving forward. So I was working on a grant a few years ago that the forms that you had to submit, they opened up in Adobe. I have all sorts of Adobe licenses through the university. I should have had no problem with Adobe. And I kept getting an error saying you had to have a different Adobe. You had to have a different Adobe. You have to have a different model or version. I couldn't get it to open those documents for the life of me. I tried in Edge. I tried in Chrome. Eventually, after several updates, Firefox worked. So those are the little tips I would give you, which is those small little details that you might not think about. Just test them ahead of time. Make sure that you're not going to be merrily ripping your hair out in the final hours because something as simple as opening a PDF to sign is going to waylay your whole effort. So test everything. Make sure your systems are going to be good. Be aware of other deadlines, whether it is that they require a pre-meeting. Sometimes they're going to want to meet with applicants virtually or possibly in person. They want to have a pre-qualification conversation with you. Sometimes they have deadlines for when you can submit technical questions. April, thank you. That is helpful to see that feedback. So great feedback right there on that PDF ideas. Sometimes you have to flat them as well. And apparently I'm not the only one who's struggled with that in the past. So test your Adobe, test everything. So make sure you're also aware of those other deadlines. If you need to have that pre-meeting with them, if there are deadlines by when you can ask questions. So SS4A, for instance, you can ask technical questions up until May 29th at 5 p.m. So Eastern. So that's it. After that point, if you've got some questions about the grant, if you're not sure how to submit, if you're not sure if your project qualifies, you might not be able to reach that project team. So you want to be aware of those deadlines. You want to be aware of any other deadlines. So SS4A, again, this year they are offering that option if you have several different safety type of plans, but you don't have a comprehensive safety action plan. If your plans that you do have, let's say you have a towards zero plan, you have a pedestrian safety plan, I think they're saying this year no more than 3 of those plans can be lumped together and qualify potentially as the comprehensive safety action plan. And what that would allow you to do is jump right to implementation funding requests. So instead of getting funding to develop your safety plan, you can use a combination of existing plans. You can self-certify that they meet the requirements of a comprehensive safety action plan, and then you can apply for implementation funding. I just boiled down a very complex thing into like 10 seconds. So again, this isn't about SS4A specifically. If you're thinking about applying, I'd love to chat with you or direct you to your MPO, your RPC. But regardless, the idea being that you have to have that review if you're going to run it by them for their input by May 9th. So you wouldn't want to miss that. If you're hoping to get some funding to put in a safety project and you've got all these plans you've worked on and it would allow you to qualify to apply, but you don't happen to have them review the plan, you're not sure if it does, you might miss that deadline. So always be on top of the deadlines. We kind of spoke to this earlier. Engage your stakeholders early and often, whether it is your project planners, your engineering consultants, elected officials, citizens. If you're going to be looking for public health input like medical, education or academics, whatever community support organization, whoever your partners and your stakeholders might be, even if you don't need to engage them specifically until the point of the grant and when you're actually doing the work, it's good to get people on board early to kind of think about what are some of your needs and some of your priorities. If I'm going to be getting funding that's going to impact you, what would you like me to consider? Certainly, if you're going to need information from them, reports, data, whatever it is, at the minimum, you might need your town manager to sign off on something, your select board to sign your proposal, your finance person to pull your budget together, whatever it is, engage them early. Like we said, everybody's busy, everybody has life happening, stuff comes up. You need to be responsible if you're putting forth a proposal to work ahead of your schedule. And again, if you don't think it can happen, maybe think about hitting pause. The other thing I would suggest, and I've kind of learned this from chasing down the status of grant proposals, is if you might be away or another stakeholder who is submitting the grant might be away for a period of time, think about including people who are either good at having an out of office assistant up or that are easily able to be found, like somebody similar in your organization to contact, because you don't want to miss an award opportunity because you happen to be out of office for 3 weeks, or maybe somebody on the award team whose name was on the grant proposal has been out on medical leave, whatever it might be, and you don't get those notifications that you're an award recipient and you miss that. So think about even those little details. Think ahead. If we're awarded this, who will they be contacting? How will they connect with them? How will they reach them? And is that a responsive person? So before we jump into what information you can gather, I want to just pause, make sure there are no questions. Not seeing anything immediately. And if you do, feel free to pop them right into that chat pod. All right, let's talk a bit about what information you might be asked to gather and how you can be ahead of the game for that. So my recommendation is try to put together a bit of an off-the-shelf package in advance. It's going to save you so much time later when you see grants that you're interested in applying for. If you have things like your agency tax documents, IRS designation, I think they call it like a 501c3 or whatever that designation is for you, that letter, tax ID numbers, if you have an organizational budget or a hierarchy or an org chart that explains who your board is or who you connect to or you report to, sometimes even having details like policies and procedures for your agency or your municipality. What is your conflict of interest policy? What is your anti-discrimination policy? If you're a nonprofit, you might have that nonprofit checklist or designation that you want to keep available. Things like bios or resumes of key project partners can be helpful. So if you have consultants or partners or stakeholders that are going to play a really prominent role in a project that you're seeking funding for, kind of have all that information about that project team buttoned up ahead of time so that you can more easily submit that and pull it together. The other thing that is helpful to keep track of over time and have ready to just kind of plug and play is past success stories. So it can be really helpful for a funding entity to see that you have managed funds for a similar purpose in the past, or you have been successful, or your agency has been successful using funding to build a park or to install a rail trail or to replace equipment effectively and efficiently, that you were a good steward of those dollars and you use them with the right reporting and with the right follow-up, and that you've just got experience in this world. So if you've got some of that, keep those past projects, whether it's pictures, newsletter, article, kind of announcing the new rail trail, letters of support from community that when you do open that new playground, whatever it might be. Most of the time when you're responding to a grant proposal or grant NOFO, your proposal is going to be limited in the number of pages that it can be. So there's a very good chance, all these wonderful little things that you tuck away in your off the shelf box, kind of, and your file on your computer or your shared drive somewhere secure, wherever you've got all this information, maybe you can't use it all. I mean, and you're not going to want to just take it all and dump it into a NOFO or response. You're going to want to kind of cull through and choose the right things, but at least have it available. So you're not spending time thinking back to, golly, I feel like the community paper did an article. It would be great to highlight how we did this in the past, but I can't find it. So keep all that pulled together in advance. Prepare some information on who you are. Like I said earlier, your hierarchy, your org chart, what the purpose, the value, importance, or kind of passions are of your agency. For your municipalities and public works departments, that's easy. You know who you're serving, but also who you are in your community. Is your community got a very young family population and you're applying for funding for some, let's say, ADA accessible equipment for the playground? Well, you can share that. We have this percentage of our families have school age children. Include why you're the right people for the project. So going back to the successes that you've had, and have you been successful in those similar projects in the past? So know who you are. The next thing is to know where to find data that helps to tell a compelling story for your grant proposal. So as we get into this section, most of what I'm going to be sharing with you are some ideas more specific to the transportation world, but I guess municipal world in general, some of these data sets. And again, you might not need all of this data. You might find that some NOFOs say you have to pull specific data from specific programs. So last year's Safe Streets and Roads for All, for instance, required screenshots of certain mapping, certain images that showed certain opportunity zones, I believe it was, or certain zones that you might be in. I've applied for other grants like that where they want to see where'd you get this data from. So wherever you're finding your data, it is really, really good if it allows you to attach documentation of it. And if you can do that in a confidential, appropriate way, but if it's a map and you're saying, we are in this opportunity zone, for instance, having that little map snip can help to show that. Let's go through some of these data sources. Lee and I are working on cleaning up our resource page on our website. And on our website resource page, in addition to all sorts of other great resources, we do have a grant writing category. So we've put a lot of these resources here that I'll be talking to you about on that website if you want to kind of do like one-stop shopping. But don't worry about kind of feverishly writing down these links. We'll make sure to get these to you as well. So the first one is the DOT Navigator. This one, as well as many of the other ones, my recommendation, if you are not following this site already, so if you are not subscribed to their newsletters or their updates, go out and subscribe because they are really a great source of sharing new grant opportunities, of sharing training for grant opportunities and how to apply to grants for just communities that are looking to pursue infrastructure projects and services. So definitely, this is one that I would recommend if you're not already following the DOT Navigator. And I haven't spent a lot of time on it recently, but in the past, it was a really good source of information, and you can very easily just subscribe to their updates. So check them out. Also, there's the DOT Competitive Grants Dashboard. I think this used to be referred to as discretionary grants, maybe DOT discretionary grants dashboard. But so DOT competitive grants dashboard, and this is another way that communities can identify competitive grant opportunities that meet your transportation infrastructure needs. So the nice thing about this is it's designed with all communities in mind, not just the bigger cities, for instance, not just state DOT. So it will help identify grant programs that might be suitable for rural agencies, for tribal agencies. It can tell you what sort of match waivers are available, what sort of matches are required. It's got some federal grant programs outside of DOT, so it's not just DOT necessarily that could be of interest to you. Previously, this was being updated weekly. Don't quote me to that because I'm not sure exactly what the cadence is now. And I wouldn't say that this is not every single grant out there that might be of interest to you, but it is a great way to just kind of see what sort of grants might be available that they are highlighting. Sorry, I just scrolled really fast there. All right, and then the next thing I want to show you is the NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Agency. NHTSA has this page where they have pulled together all sorts of different data publications, fatal and injury reporting system tools. So that's the first tool, FIRST, for fatal and serious injury crash data. They have state tables, they have some crash maps, downloadable crash databases. Keep in mind, though, for all of this, particularly for those of you from New Hampshire, we know that there can be some challenges in accessing crash data. NHTSA is just going to have what's reported, at the state level, what's allowable. So you might not find that there are crash maps for your state or for your region, but certainly there's a lot of information here. So if you are putting forth a transportation infrastructure proposal, you might find that you can lean into some data or some information, either from your community, if it's available, or your state, but maybe similar states or similar communities that might have data available that you can at least reference. And you want to make sure it's clear that this isn't about our community, but we're a similar size, we're a similar scope, we have some of the same challenges, and here's their crash figures or whatever it might be. So check these tools out. I mentioned the fatal and serious injury reporting system first, and that is a great location to get crash data, serious and fatal crash data. It looks back several years. The other thing I will say, of course, is anytime you're applying for a grant, most of the time you want to also be connecting with your regional planning commission. Here in New Hampshire, I think in other states you have different entities, you might refer to them differently, but in New Hampshire, we have several regional planning commissions or RPCs, and we have, I think, 4 MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And those MPOs are housed within the RPCs, but not every RPC is an MPO. But regardless, those staff are really well equipped to help you navigate grant opportunities, to help you consider the impact for your community, and to help you access crash data and some other data, whether it's traffic volumes, perhaps speeding data, those sort of things your RPCs should have access to, or can put you in touch with entities that do. If you're in New Hampshire and you're not sure how to get in touch with your RPC, or you're looking for additional guidance, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you make those connections. The other thing I will mention, and I kind of said it earlier, is sometimes you need to connect, actually attach that data and that documentation. So for instance, if you're using crash data from the NHTSA first system, the FARS data, you might want to take a screenshot of that and include that table, for instance, if that's what the grant requires. Just make sure you know if they're asking for specific data, where to find it, and that you're attaching it or including it in the format that they want it included in. Federal Highway Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty has some mapping tools for you as well. So you can check out some of these. So things like air quality, if you were applying, for instance, for a clean diesel grant, you might find that you could go out here and you could look at a map that would help you know, is my community in an area where air quality could be a concern? And is that something that I can include in my narrative as to the value of replacing aging diesel equipment or looking at cleaner energy sources? So any of these might help you set up your grant narrative or some information. I'll also mention that I have struggled in the past sometimes to understand the definition of a rural municipality versus a non-rural municipality. Sometimes we call them urban, suburban. It can get a little confusing. So there is this kind of helpful mapping tool. This came out from USDOT. And I don't want to suggest that every DOT grant looks to this tool for the definition of rural or non-rural. You do want to read through the grant that you're considering, but there is also a mapping tool out there that will kind of nicely tell you if your area is in what they would consider or define as rural, based upon different programs at DOT that kind of distinguish rural from non-rural. And we'll go through just a couple other resources here, and then we'll get right back into some questions and next steps. All right, so this is another tool that you could find helpful, the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. They call it the Place and Health map. And what this does is it kind of takes that idea of social vulnerability, where potential and negative effects on a community that can be caused by outside stressors, things like a natural disaster or a human-made disaster or a disease outbreak. Those things that can happen outside the community can impact the community. And conversely, if we can strengthen um, and reduce social vulnerability, we can help strengthen not only human health, but economic health. So this particular tool is based upon that, and it looks at, I think, 16 census variables and census criteria, and it can help local officials determine if one of those stressors or events happens in their community, what level of support might the community need before, during, and after? How quickly is that community perhaps positioned to recover? So this could help you to develop needs-based statements. So if you're trying to communicate or maybe you're submitting for a new fire truck in your community and you are in a community that has high fire risks or other risks of fire, or people might not be able to get out of their homes as quickly, whatever it could be, you might find some information in here that helps you to explain the level of vulnerability in your community and how your project might address that. Some of these tools and data sets are currently not available from my review. So take all of this as just kind of like a tuck away in the back of your mind. You probably have heard of some of these data sets: opportunity zones, empowerment zones, choice neighborhoods, that they've kind of varied over, the past couple of decades. We might have referred to them as different things. But in some cases, this historical information is still retained and stored out there. Maybe your community has pulled that information in the past. So if you feel that the data supports your grant and the goals of the granting agency that's kind of distributing the funding, you may decide to include some of these figures, such as if you have, let's say, a percentage of your community that has a large number of people living in a neighborhood that falls under the poverty guidelines. Many of the people in that neighborhood fall under poverty guidelines, or if your project is looking to achieve a quality of life for certain populations, maybe for seniors or whatever it might be. If you have a project that's working to make it like a healthier, more thriving community, you might want to refer to some of these figures and some of this data. But again, just always be aware of what is your funding agency that you're applying for, the grantor. What are their goals? What are their efforts with their funding? And how are you matching your project to that appropriately? And does your data tell that story and help make that connection? You also want to think ahead about any required forms. What will need to be authorized by who? What are they signing off and agreeing to as part of this proposal? Who does it impact or involve? And a kind of quick example, I had been applying for some funding several years ago. Um, and it might have been a bit of a stretch, but everybody was working hard to try to get it in. It was for some CDL training. And one of the requirements was that the recipient agency, which would have been UNHT2, was required to display what was called a public notice of Title VI program rights in every single building and location. And that Bill of Rights, or that notice, communicates non-discrimination details. Um, for me, when I realized that, I'm sure our university, we have entire systems in place to make sure we're following the law and we're supporting a good environment for everyone. But I don't know that we technically have a public notice of Title VI program rights on every single door to every single building across our UNH campus in Durham, never mind our broader university system. So I kind of had to pause and think, okay, what am I in essence potentially signing the university up for if I say, yeah, you give me this small grant and I'll go ahead and I'll make sure that every single door on campus has the required notification in every single building. I couldn't make that sort of commitment without bringing right folks into the conversation and making sure that, are they talking just about T2? Are they talking just about my office building? What does this mean? So again, you're going to want to make sure that you've read that ahead. SS4A, last year, they required things like a disclosure of lobbying activities, assurances for non-construction projects. They might require those same forms again this year. I haven't looked at the NOFO in that detail, but those are forms that you'd want to be ready to have somebody sign and that they want to be familiar with. The other things that you should start gathering really early are your supporting documents and letters of support. Again, just an area to be respectful of people's time, an area to highlight past successes. So it could be economic development plans, land use development plans, any example of your community receiving funds for safety improvements, letters of support, all those past successes. So leave enough time for people to draft those letters of support. Sometimes it's helpful to include a template for the person or the individual or the agency you're requesting a letter of support from. Have a conversation with them. Why are you approaching them for a letter of support? What will their role be? If it's a letter of commitment, that can take even longer. So if you are saying, if we get the funding for this project, this group is committed to helping us by providing space, by providing technical expertise, by providing funding, whatever it is, that letter of commitment usually is going to require a little longer as well to get. So be aware of that. Go back one bit here. I think we've touched on everything there. We'll do a quick, we're about 45 minutes in, so I'm just going to do a very quick little pause to make sure there aren't any questions. Y'all are hanging out and being strong with me chatting at you a lot today, so thank you for that. All right, so we've gone through all the things together. We've talked about who might be a part of it, the standard proposal sections. And this, again, will vary for every single notice of funding opportunity. Every NOFO might request different documents, different sections, different things. But oftentimes you're going to see requests for a cover letter, an executive summary, an organization background, your needs statement, goals, objectives, and evaluations. How will you evaluate the success if you get the funding? If you put that project or that activity into place, what sort of reports, metrics, follow-ups, what will be your success line? How will you share that? You're going to need a budget. Most all are going to ask for a budget. And then any other addendum items, letters of support, history, or other information. These are within all of these are ways that AI could potentially help. And again, we'll get into some considerations if you are using AI, but it could help you in drafting cover letters. It could take your proposal and boil it down to an executive summary. So there are a lot of ways that you can lean into technology to help you with some of this. There are a lot of things you need to be aware of though too. So you don't want to just assume that AI is going to be the do all end all for you. Be aware of buzzwords. You know the buzzwords in your agency. You know the buzzwords in the industry. We all know, even just within our tiny little New Hampshire world, NHPWA, NHPWMA, APWA, any APWA. I've talked about, NHTSA today, NHTSA, buzzwords galore, acronyms galore. We are, I would certainly say, an industry that loves our acronyms, but I'm guessing other industries have an acronym issue as well. But all of those kind of the technical jargon, language that is not outside your standard readers, somebody who's maybe not from the industry, the funding agency might not know these terms, might not know the buzzwords. Whoever's reading your grant proposal needs to understand what you're saying. So your grant proposal is not the time to try to pull together a comprehensive list of buzzwords, acronyms, and the best technical jargon that we're using. You really want to use plain language. You want to make sure it's very readable to somebody who comes from outside your wheelhouse, and that they're going to understand what you're asking for, what you're planning to do with it, and how you're going to gauge your success in that. You also want to be aware of a grant proposal that is problem focused and not solutions oriented. So that goes back to when we first started and we said, be really clear in tying your project or your activity or your request for the funding as a solution to the problem that that funding agency wants to solve. So the grantor has some money that they're trying to distribute to solve a problem that they're passionate about. You want to show how you can help be a part of that solution. You don't want to just kind of dump a bunch of problems and issues on them and not show how, if they fund you, you can help to address those issues. Integrate considerations for any sort of systems-based priorities, or again, the agency that's providing this funding or has this grant opportunity, are they interested in the towards zero approach? Do they want to know how you're going to use something like safe systems approach? Little sidebar, we have a safe systems approach webinar coming up in 2 days. So if you are in the transportation industry, you're not super familiar with safe systems approach, it's a pretty quick webinar. I want to say it's like hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, but we're just going to do a nice high level overview of safe systems approach. Complete streets, if that is a priority for the funding agency, some of these emphasis areas that are beneficial to integrate dialogue around in your proposal, only if they're actually applicable and if you're familiar with them. Don't just kind of toss buzzwords out there for the sake of it. But here in New Hampshire, we have a towards zero commitment. We are working with safe systems approach and showing an awareness of those, showing those how you would use those really well-established systems and frameworks can be helpful for the right type of grant, and as long as it matches. So the other thing you want to think about is a plan for maintenance and what happens afterward. Once you get the funding, once you do the installation, once you add the sidewalks, put up the signs, install the playground, create the rail trail, how do you maintain it? And you want to start thinking about this before you even apply for a grant. Particularly within your municipality, you want to think about who's going to maintain the assets And how are they going to budget for that? I think most of our municipal highway departments would say that their budgets certainly haven't grown significantly year over year. So if we're adding some infrastructure to that budget, are there the resources, are there the funds to continue to maintain that infrastructure? Oftentimes, you might be required to maintain it in perpetuity. Always once we install that, we're going to give you the money to put that playground in, but then it is up to you to keep it maintained, and we need to see that it's maintained. Some grants even will require ongoing reporting. So think about the maintenance of these projects, but also thinking about the reporting requirements. And if you go ahead and you get, let's say, exercise stations installed throughout your park, and the seniors are loving it, but that grant requires a count each year of how many people are using those services, how many trail maps are taken from the trailhead, how many seniors sign in at the guest book for the senior center, whatever it might be. And they want that reporting once a year for 10 years or for 20 years. And you leave your job and you head somewhere else, you got big, exciting things happening for you, and somebody else steps into your role. Are they going to be okay with that commitment? Are they going to be comfortable pulling that information together? What if suddenly the community wants to do something different with the rail trail or do something different with the park? So you need to always think about that, and you need to consider, is the reporting, is the maintenance, is it going to be feasible for our community, for those who are committing to this, or is it going to be onerous, or is it going to be something we can't maintain? If that's so, it might not be the right grant for you to pursue at that point. So give consideration to all of that. Um, you also want to think about how they are making their selection criteria. How are award decisions going to be made? And again, think about this early on, because you want to try to fit your information into the buckets that make the most sense for them. So oftentimes, a funding agency will communicate award criteria or a scoring matrix or something like that. If they don't, you just want to use your best judgment based on what they're prioritizing, which they're seeing as important. This is an example, and I know it's not super easy to read from a webinar perspective, but this is the scoring criteria for New Hampshire DES's latest Granite State Clean Fleets program, for instance. So this is the program I mentioned earlier that New Hampshire Public Works teams, the webinar is tomorrow. Please make sure if you've got some aging equipment that you might want to replace, this could potentially provide some funding to help a bit with that. But so they did put out a scoring criteria, and they had the basic scoring criteria, and then they had bonus criteria. So, you're going to get certain points for where your proposal hits on, or where your project or your equipment or your suggested purchase is going to achieve either cost effectiveness of carbon reductions or project readiness, clarity. So you want to read through all of that and kind of self-evaluate yourself. Ask somebody else to self-evaluate you. You could potentially, I haven't tried this, but you could potentially even ask AI to self-evaluate you. So if you get your proposal ready, then you share the scoring criteria, and then you say, here's my proposal, score me on this. Get someone to kind of run you through that process, and somebody who's outside the scope of the proposal. Because one thing I will say, and you've probably experienced it in other things that you've worked on, the longer and the more deeply involved I am in preparing a grant proposal, the harder it is for me to proofread my final work and for me to make sure it makes sense, because I have just poured hours of research and time and consideration into this document. And by the time I'm reading it for like the 20th time, I'm glossing over typos. I'm glossing over things that in my mind make sense and maybe don't to someone else. So have a good final proofreader who can help you with that and understand their scoring criteria. Also think about the metrics of the reporting. So again, what are your obligations, but also what will success look like, and can you commit to that reasonably? What are you going to report back to the funding agency? Most grants are going to require a progress report at some cadence. They're going to require a post-award data collection and reporting. So you want to build those metrics in a way that you can keep the commitment. Don't overpromise. Don't promise data just for the sake of data. Really understand, what are they looking for? What are they requiring? What can I meet? I have to be able to meet their bare minimums, but do I have a way to easily report additional information that I think would be helpful? Why am I collecting this data? What's the value of it? What makes sense to track, monitor, analyze? What's meaningful? So you're going to want to include that, and you're going to want to make sure you have the resources for it, whether it's something that you can budget for. Sometimes some funds will allow you to apply for a portion of your funding to help with metrics and reporting, but not all of them by any stretch of the imagination do. So you want to be thinking through that piece as well. Most grants I'm working with, we have a quarterly report due, we have some annual reports due. We're lucky to have some reporting systems in place and some processes we've built so that it doesn't become such a disaster at the end of the year trying to pull all that together. We're starting from a pretty good place, and if you can set those systems up, it will help you. As you're pulling that proposal together, and as you're getting towards that kind of goal line of submitting it, keep it neat, keep it tidy, keep it clear. You want to communicate really effectively, from the information that you're sharing to how you share it, from your use of words, your acronyms like we talked about. Are you answering their questions? They have certain facts that they want to know from you. They have certain things that they're going to ask you to answer, whether it is how your project will fit what they're doing, how your project's going to get rolled out. You can't try to take on the perspective of, well, I'm just going to squeeze my project or my idea into their framework. I'm going to just make it fit. I know they want these 10 questions, but I'm going to just kind of rewrite the mold and take this great project that's so worthy and force it to fit their framework. They're gonna see that. They're gonna know what's going on there. Um, Ask somebody not only to proofread, but to give you some hard feedback. So when you do choose that final proofreader, we all have those friends that are super supportive, super wonderful. Everything we do is just bubblegum and hearts and roses. You're going to want to ask somebody else who is going to give you the hard feedback and say, okay, so this section didn't make sense to me, or I feel like maybe there's a gap here, or are you really going to be able to make this happen? Don't serve them a proposal that's undone. Don't submit a half-done proposal. Don't submit with incomplete information. Do everything exactly as they ask. Whatever they want for information, you're going to need to provide. If they say they want a 2-page narrative, if you've got the most beautifully, elegantly written 3-page narrative, cut it down to 2 pages. So really do follow their format and be clear, be concise. So some quick kind of reminders here as we start to move into the budgeting. Be clear, concise, compelling, be organized and logical in your writing. Remember the audience and write for the reviewer. Be informative and follow all their instructions carefully. All right, we have some information on budgets coming up and then some AI. So we are still on track just fine for our 90 minutes, but I do want to take a moment and just see if there are any questions. He has very nicely shared that safe systems approach. Would love to see some of you there. Okay, so let's get into preparing the budget. You're typically going to be required to provide a budget summary as kind of like a high-level overview of estimated activity costs. And in many cases, they're going to want like a line item detailed budget. Sometimes they have a template. They say, we want you to put together this budget in this sort of template. Sometimes they want it organized by major cost elements. They might want it grouped into categories, things like federal funding, non-federal funding. They will likely ask you to include any match details. So cost or value of in-kind match. They're going to want to see that explained. So first understand, how does the budget need to be submitted? Is there a template? What sort of items do I need to include in the budget? What is not allowable in the budget? So oftentimes any previously incurred expenses are not going to be allowable for your budget. They're not going to allow you to incur costs before, like project development costs or whatever it might be. Most grants are looking for, once you have all your approvals in place, that's when you can start the project. Some things might allow for some sub-award or post-award or pre-award costs, but you do want to know what's allowable on the budget and what is not. And then you need to also consider, again, going back to the idea of data and performance reporting. Is that something you need to budget for, and how do you allocate and share that? You're going to need backup documentation. In most cases, you're going to want to make sure you have really solidly circled yourself around what things are going to cost. So that could come from multiple quotes. It could come line by line details, a clear understanding of where the funds are going to go, who it's going to go to. You might need some clear documentation for existing funds that you have. So if this is a fund that you're applying for to kind of offset some costs, and you've got some other grants that are helping with this project, they might want to see that documentation. So make sure that you've got good documentation. Particularly, we know over the past couple of years, it's been tough sometimes to predict what something's going to cost. So I'm not suggesting, if it doesn't say you need quotes for that new piece of equipment, maybe you don't want to spend your time going out and getting 5 different quotes, but maybe you want to reach out to other towns that have purchased recently, say, hey, what'd you spend? Maybe you want to reach out to your vendor and get a rough idea to make sure you're budgeting properly, because you do want to ask for enough. You want to make sure you're going to be able to get the work done that you're committing to. That said, you don't want to ask for extra. You want to use the requested format. You want to provide any detail they need, and you want to make sure that your budget matches your narrative. If you are saying we are going to get A, B, and C done, but you haven't accounted for where it's going to get done, you didn't budget for, a computer to do the work, you didn't budget for the equipment that's going to need to be rented to build the playground. You just want to kind of line everything up. This is the work I said I'm going to get done. This is all the resource I'm going to need to do it. I need to make sure they understand that I am really strategic. I have really thought this through. I have everything budgeted for that I need to do the job. Also, don't build your plan with the idea that you'll just return extra money. Do the legwork to figure out what you really need, whether it's those vendors, consultants, prior RFPs. And even if you can ask for or submit a request for 100% of what you need, don't do that if you don't have to. In most cases, you kind of need a compelling argument in order to put all of your eggs in one basket. So, for instance, this year's notice of funding opportunity for SS4A suggests that they expect to award 40 to 70 implementation awards nationally in a range of 2.5 million up to $25 million. That's a pretty broad range, 2.5 million to 25 million. And then on planning and demonstrations, I think that was like several hundred awards. And that range was going to be 100,000 to $5 million. So again, very big range. What we can assume is that they probably expect different size jurisdictions, different types of municipalities. Maybe some of those are multi-jurisdictional applications. Some of those are MPOs versus a small town of 10,000 people. Some of those are where you have a consultant who's going to be doing the work. Others, you're maybe doing it in-house. So there's a big range there. So if I'm a small community and I really only need, let's say, $200,000 to develop my comprehensive safety action plan, but I'm like, hey, you know what? I might as well just go big or go home. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask for $1 million. And they're like, okay, so Marilee, explain why your community of 5,000 people needs $1 million to develop a comprehensive safety action plan that, other communities of your size have done for 150,000, for instance. So you want to make sure that you're being reasonable. You're not just kind of covering yourself and having extra money in the overhead in case things come up. And then again, go back and look at what they've historically funded. What have they provided for grant amounts? This can be helpful if you're, let's say, applying for a grant where the funding agency, the grantor, says we have $250,000 to allocate to this program this year, and you go in and you ask for the full 250,000. You've got a project in mind that's 250,000. We'll get it done. But then you find out after the fact that they typically like to distribute several grants in the amount of no more than, let's say, 20,000. You're probably going to have screened yourself out because you asked for the whole pot, and historically they like to kind of break it up and have impact across areas, for instance. So in order to have your request viewed favorably, just be aware of asking for the right amount, knowing what they typically provide, and don't ask for more, don't ask for less, ask for the proper piece. Rarely are you going to find a grant funding opportunity that provides 100% funding. They certainly exist, but many of the grants out there require either a cost share or a match. So match or cost sharing, it's the portion of the total project cost that is not paid for with the granting agency's funds. So in the case of federal funds, cost share is the 20%, for instance, that doesn't come from the federal government, it comes from other sources. The reason that funding entities might, of course, want matching funds is, one, it's your commitment to accept risk. It's kind of your skin in the game. It also promotes the opportunity to leverage other funding sources, whether it's state funding sources, in-kind funding commitments, to accomplish more with those dollars. In some cases, partners can aggregate grant funds for projects, but you do want to understand what is allowable, what is not allowable. So there are many opportunities to use in kind, such as volunteer hours contributing to the project, or if you are going to be having public meetings and one of your property managers in the area has offered up their facilities to host those public meetings, or if you have an engineering consultant, for instance, that's going to offer up their services, those might be allowable as match or in-kind contributions, but you do want to make sure you understand what is or is not allowable under each particular grant. Know what you can contribute to afford or what you can afford to contribute. Know that you can meet that 20%. Be ready to, if 20% is your match share, be ready to document how you're going to do that. If you are allowed to use staff labor as the match, you're going to need to be able to provide payroll records. You're going to have to truly show that your 20%, if it was 20% made up by staff labor, putting in the playground, for instance, these are the payroll records that support that we did, in fact, do our 20% through that means. So all of it's going to have to line up. All of it's going to have to match up. There is a site out there where you can see what volunteer time might be worth. Every source, every program is different. So I don't want to suggest that volunteer time is allowable under one grant, but it might not be under another. So you want to read, you want to know what in-kind match is allowable, how it breaks out. And again, be very careful about taking money and spending money if you can't match it. Some cases, they're going to need to see your match happening over the course of the project. Some cases, you can spend it and then prove it after, and you support the documentation after. Whatever it is, if you're committed to, I'm going to take your money and I'm going to spend it and I'm going to show you where I put my 20%, for instance, in, you're going to have to show that record at the right time. So be aware of that. And this is just a quick calculation if you're not familiar with the idea of cost share and matching. If you have a $200 project cost, total cost, and 80% of it can be federal, you're going to have 160,000 of that 200 is your federal. And then once you remove that 160 from 200,000, you end up with your local share, what you have to match. So obviously, again, every grant has a different matching scenario or cost share or your share of it. Everyone has different expenses they allow. You just want to read the NOFO and you want to understand what you're applying for. Similarly, with operating expenses, they're typically not covered by grants. So operating expenses are things like phones, IT, benefits for staff working on the project, pay for staff might not be allowable. Keeping the lights on, the electric bill, the office furniture, those may not, in most cases, be allowable. Sometimes you can charge space or utilities as an in-kind match relative to the scale of the award. It gets a little tricky, so you'd always want to really read the fine print and truly understand it. But if your award, for instance, equals 5% of your organization's budget for the year, it's possible you could, in some cases, again, very few, but some cases, they will say you can take 5% of those space costs and count it towards a local match if it's not an indirect rate. So read those details, understand that, but just know that a lot of times the cost of having mobile data, the cost of having a cell phone, the cost of turning on lights and buying furniture to get set up for your project, it's oftentimes not going to be allowable. So this is another area to just think about your wants and your needs. You want to make sure that you can document everything. A few tips for in-kind match, and again, this might vary depending upon the grant. You might be able to include donated office or meeting space. You might be able to include volunteer time. You should document fringe benefits and other costs if you are including staff or volunteer time as well. You're going to need to document all of that. So let's talk about some common budgeting errors. It happens, especially as you have all sorts of bits and pieces coming together for your narrative and your proposal, and you've got a budget that you're trying to match and cross all your T's and dot all your I's. So you really want to go through your budget with a fine-tooth comb and again, match line by line by line. Does everything add up? Do those calculations over and over again. You want to avoid errors. You want to avoid miscalculations. You want to avoid numbers that are not balanced or don't add up. So you have one document that suggests one number and Form B suggests something else. You want to make sure your charts all line up. If you've referenced chart 1, 2, 3, 4, but then the charts aren't numbered properly, if things don't sync up that way, if there are any missing details, all of that might reflect poorly about your agency's ability to see the grant through. It might cause confusion. It could put you out of the running for that funding. So avoid those common budgeting errors. avoid any costs that aren't eligible. And that could include, this is not an exhaustive list. It's, again, every grant could be different, but things like food and beverages, childcare services. If you're having childcare available at a public input meeting, for instance, and you're serving refreshments, in many cases, you're not going to be able to recover those costs through the funding. Promotional materials. It could be that promotional materials count as in kind. If your community business has donated those materials, that could work. But there are always things that are not going to be allowable, things that are. So you just want to make sure if it's eligible for match, if it's eligible for cost share or not, that you're documenting it properly on your budget. Let's imagine you have reached that point where your grant has been submitted and now you are waiting to see what happens. It is okay to follow up. You want to do so with courtesy. But if you're like me, last year I had submitted for a grant that with all of the things happening at the federal level, I didn't hear about it, didn't hear about it, didn't hear about it. And I was able to reach out with the program manager, and a very nice gentleman called me back, had some good conversations about what was going on. So you can typically reach someone if you're in. um, don't be a nuisance, but know that it's okay to follow up. They're passionate about distributing this money, so they want to do what they can to help make that match happen. The other thing I'll say is if you're ever offered the opportunity to meet or discuss your grant request, take it. Anytime that you can get into the room, whether it's the virtual room, the in-person room with your grantors, it gives you that chance to build rapport and to let them get to know you, to answer their questions. So that's not something that happens often where they end up wanting to do a meeting, but if it does, take that opportunity and run with it. Rejection hurts. So if your grant is not accepted for award, you do not get the funding, there could be a few reasons. It could be goal alignment, that the goals and the projects that you put forth don't meet the goals and the requirements of the grant. It could be preparedness, whether it was your organization preparedness and maybe your agency isn't ready to execute that type of project, and that kind of showed through in your documentation. Maybe your readiness for the goal, whatever we're trying to do for a project, the community is just not ready for that. The technology is not ready to support that, whatever it could be. It might be a lack of measurable metrics. Maybe they couldn't tell what your goals were, how you were going to determine if you had met those metrics successfully or those goals successfully. They weren't sure what your steps would be and how you would take actionable steps to achieve it. And it could be the budget. I would say in cases where I have had a grant not approved, sometimes I think for me it was goal alignment. Um, Maybe once or twice budget where maybe I was asking more than they typically would distribute. But those are lessons learned for me. So now I make sure everything is right on the line, right on the dot there. But do think about those things. Was it an inconsistent budget? Was it really variable? So some agencies that have funding to distribute, they might say, hey, now is just a really volatile time in this particular market, and we're not sure you're going to be able to do this job to spec or to budget because of things that are going on, and they might not award certain projects for that reason. So what I would say though is it's always okay, in my opinion, to reach out and ask for a general input after. If you have the opportunity to call and talk to somebody and politely inquire, was it one thing? Was it a number of things that weighed into factor? I wouldn't suggest sending an email necessarily. I think this is a case where, if you're hoping to get some feedback, pick up the phone, give them a call, let them know you appreciate that they reviewed it and that you're just curious, if they would share some of the things that might not have worked out well in the review, so that you can maybe integrate it into future opportunities for your project or just learn from that. They might also be able to network and know of other grants that are of interest to you. So in the transportation industry, for instance, maybe this one particular grant fund isn't an opportunity for you, but they can think, hey, we've got this other proposal or NOFO coming out soon, maybe look at that and see if that's something that's a fit. If you did not get the rejection letter and you got the award letter, congratulations. The big thing you want to be aware of is when you can actually start spending that money. Grant funding obligation does not happen at the swipe of the award letter by most cases. So oftentimes there is an obligation process, and that could include that the selected applicant and the funding agency enter into a written agreement. There might be some administrative requirements that have to be satisfied. They have to see policies, they have to see procedures, they have to see financial information, whatever it is. In many cases, it might have to go through, at least here in New Hampshire, we have governor and council. I don't know if all states have what they consider governor and council, but for New Hampshire, some of these funding through the state will need to go through governor and council's approval and review. So you want to make sure that all of those T's are crossed, all of those I's are dotted, everything is lined up, and you genuinely and truly have the all set to go ahead before you start spending money. Because as we mentioned, most grants aren't going to incur or allow previously incurred costs or previously expended costs to be applied to the grant. So you do want to make sure everything is all set, that you are, full steam ahead, you've done everything you have to do. Just seeing your award posted on a list doesn't mean you have the funding. We have been awarded the Highway Construction Workforce Partnership Grant, and we received that notice of award back in December. There's a press release out there that includes New Hampshire, but we still haven't been able to finalize that award process. So I have not started that project. There's nothing to bill, nothing that's been done, because until all the ducks are in a row and I know for certain that funding is ready to rock and roll, we're not going to start that project. So sometimes it takes a little patience, and you just want to make sure that you're in good shape. As you would expect, you must comply with all applicable requirements of federal law when you're receiving federal funds. So if you are agreeing to take their money, you're going to want to make sure you understand their policies and their expectations. So this is a notice that was from, I think, SS4A last year, and it's just a very clear: if you have failed to comply with the federal requirements, they can terminate your award, they can disallow any previously incurred costs, and you can be forced to return those award funds. So you want to make sure everything you're committing to is something that you can actually follow up on and that you're being accurate. Some additional ways of potentially identifying funding sources. So grants.gov, GuideStar. I haven't used GuideStar a lot, but others have mentioned this. Others have mentioned NOSA. So I should kind of caution, like, I've not gone out to these sites. I don't know what the current status is. Charitable foundations, anything from AARP to local charitable organizations, national charitable organizations, you can reach out to those. AAA, I think, distributes funds as well sometimes. So be aware of those sort of opportunities. Industry associations and partnerships. Your environmental services group, community conservation groups, all of these may be groups that can help you identify funding opportunities or provide funding. You could also just go to a web search, Google search, whatever you use, and search for 990, which are the tax returns that nonprofits complete, and do like a specific organization search and see what types of projects they have funded, and maybe talk to others that have received those sort of funds to know if there might be an opportunity for you there. Couple resources for you here, and then we're going to get into some AI conversation. Localinfrastructure.org. If you are not following this group, this is another one that I would say go out and hit subscribe. They are a group of partners that work to help local agencies navigate and understand information about funding opportunities. Specifically, it came about after the bipartisan infrastructure law, but they've got a lot of good resources. They do an application boot camp or grant boot camp for a limited number of communities or entities each year. So definitely check them out if you're not familiar with them. We already talked about DOT Navigator, a great source there. So I'm going to pause before we talk about AI and just make sure there aren't any questions. We're down to our last few slides here. Looks like most of you are hanging in okay there. All right. If you've got thoughts, questions, please feel free to use that chat pod. We'd love to see them. So hopefully applying for grants feels less overwhelming after some of our conversation today, but it is a really big task, especially when I look at like our local departments of public works, and you don't oftentimes have a dedicated grant writer. You might not have somebody at your municipal level whose sole purpose is to write grants. So anytime you can streamline or make the process more efficient, I'm a big fan of. So tools like, I mentioned earlier, not to sell ChatGPT, but just it's the tool I'm familiar with. It can support the process, but there are going to be limitations. So what you want to be aware of is that how can you use AI effectively, but still have moral and ethical considerations, still be following your municipalities or your agency's AI policy requirements if you have an AI policy. In some cases, some funding agencies are beginning to address how AI can or cannot be used in preparing a grant proposal. So that is something you really want to be aware of. While most proposals I have seen out there right now currently do not ban or outright restrict the use of AI. It's possible that we'll see more of that happening as we go forward. But some of them are. Some of them are saying how you can or cannot use AI. They want to make sure the work is your own, that the proposal is your own. So you want to read your NOFO. You want to really understand how you're using AI. You want to know your agency's policy. The big thing I will press as well, anytime you are using any sort of AI tool, is confidentiality and protection of the information. So it might be really helpful to a grant proposal to kind of funnel in all sorts of information about your agency, but you want to be super, super aware of privacy, confidentiality, discretion, data security. So anytime you're putting anything in AI, my suggestion, just assume it's public knowledge. Assume it could be used for training purposes for the AI tool. Assume it could become public information. You don't want to put in payroll information. You don't want to put in financial figures. You don't want to put in personnel information. Some We could go on a whole training about AI. And again, if that interests you, let us know. We did a webinar a couple months ago about that. Um, but some entities or some agencies do have like enterprise models of AI that you might have more freedom or flexibility to use in different ways. But as a whole, just be really cautious about what you're putting in. So now that I've given you that disclaimer, let's talk about some things you might be able to use it for. And I'm going to just kind of refer to the SS4A grant application specifically. It can help you break down that complex 76-page NOFO into really plain language. And I'll show you an example of what I did with it this morning. I think we got down to like 2 pages of key points that I need to think about to apply for SS4A. It can help you determine if you qualify for an action plan or implementation funding. It could identify what sort of data do you need. So crash stats, prior plans, what sort of information are you going to have to pull? It could draft proposal text based on your notes, based on your goals, based on what you might point it to on your municipal website. It could help you pull together some drafts. It could prepare some sample budgets, a letter of support template, perhaps. It can certainly generate checklists to help you organize your plan. So you can think of AI as a really smart assistant to help you organize, help you draft, help you explain. What I always say though is it is never a substitute for the human. I don't know what'll happen in 10, 20 years. I don't pretend to know the world and what's going to happen with AI. And those are really important conversations. So if you're hearing conversations about the future of the workforce and I think that's valuable. I think that's important. But I definitely don't have my head wrapped around it enough to say what's right or wrong. But I do know right now AI can be very helpful in my role. But it's not replaced my human oversight. You always need to be available to read everything, to respond to everything, to vet any context, to make sure it fits the scenario that you're working within. So it can be really helpful. Other things it can't do, though, it can't actually submit your SS4A proposal for you. It can't sign your official forms. It can't certify your legal or your financial compliance. It's not going to know if your budget is missing something big. It doesn't have that context like, oh, wait a minute, we didn't account for the gasoline or the diesel fuel that needs to go in the trucks that are going to be used to do this project. It might not catch that. It can't necessarily answer eligibility questions, and it certainly can't guarantee award success. So you know the project, you know the needs, the budget, the work. So you really need to be super present, even if you're using AI and reviewing, approving, thinking about all the content. You can't just kind of step out of that process. I would suggest avoiding AI for obviously anything that's unreviewed. You don't want to just ask it to prepare your proposal and hit send. That's not a best practice by any stretch of the imagination. You don't want to copy paste generic boilerplate information. You don't just want to send it a template that anybody could have pulled from AI. Like I said, don't let it replace your judgment or your technical expertise, and just keep it as a tool. It can't be your ghostwriter. You still have to lead the project. You still have to lead the writing. You still have to lead the review. You still have to connect all the dots and make sure everything adds up. Like I mentioned, you can use it though to take those NOFOs and put it into clear language. You could potentially draft some budgets, some letters, some summaries, some executive summaries, organizing your content logically. AI excels at this. If you've kind of got a jumble of information and you've got all these thoughts that you've started to put on paper, it is really, really fantastic at making sense of that and helping you to come up with a really polished, organized document. It does sometimes mess up dates. I've had it I give it all the information it needs and it puts the wrong dates, it puts the wrong reference, it made up a bunch of names. I was using it for meeting minutes recently, and instead of just connecting the names like I asked it to, it literally just made up names of, who had made a motion to approve. So it's not perfect by any means, but it can definitely help you kind of organize things, and it can help with final review. So certainly once you've got everything written, whatever information you're comfortable isn't confidential or isn't personal or of a financial or personal nature, you could feed that narrative into the AI and have it just do a proofread. You can specify if you want it to just read for any big glaring errors, or do you want it to provide some feedback? How do you want that output? So really good for that. Some final tips, and then we can share some examples. Again, review and edit everything. Use local data and community specific examples. Don't get wrapped up in letting AI pull together all its examples. I have seen where it kind of makes up things that might have happened in your communities. And when I kind of push, and this came up when I was asking for examples of brine success in New Hampshire, of communities that had converted to liquid or brine, and case studies. And it just kind of jumbled together some reports and some meeting minutes of communities that had attended some green snow pro discussions, and maybe made some assumptions that they therefore were using brine. And when I pushed it on where the data came from, it couldn't necessarily support that. So you want to, your local data, your community specifics, make sure you're cross-checking that. It's okay to let it guide the structure and the storytelling of your proposal, as long as it's true and it's your words and it's getting to the heart of what you want to communicate for your proposal. You need to own that final product. And you also need to always make sure you're following your agency's guidelines for use of AI. And going back to that idea that some grants are now prohibiting the use of AI, you want to make sure you're being ethical and moral, and that you're following the funding agency's guidance as well. But if you want to get started, you might ask it to build a checklist, a timeline, or draft an outline from your grant notice. Those can be kind of fun, easy ways. So we have a few minutes left. I want to hop over and show you just a couple examples of AI. But if you have not yet seen, we have an Intro to Public Works Budgeting webinar coming up. That's our next webinar. Lee, I don't think I updated the date on this one. I don't think it's in July, but maybe.
It
So
is June 4th, I
thank you.
believe.
I missed that correction. So June 4th, join us for Intro to Public Works Budgeting if you would like to. We're still pulling together that resource page, so this QR code, will make sure it's emailed out to you all as well. But our resource site has a lot of great information, and it will have all of this grant related, the links and such that we have shared. So Lee, I'm going to go ahead and just close my presentation here. And I think you will be nice enough to tell me if I am showing you my chat GPT.
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. All right. So what I'm going to ask it to do here, and I've done a little bit of pre-work, so ignore, I wanted to come up with a good prompt. I have this prompt down here at the bottom, and I'm going to ask it to summarize the DES Granite State Fleet's request for proposal NOFO, and to create a Public Works Director plain English desk reference. And so what I did is I first told it, you're an expert in government grants. You are an expert in local public works operations. Your job is to break this notice of funding down into clear, plain English, what you should assume, what you should not, what I want for an output. I gave it to some suggestions of, I want to know the grant program, who's offering it, how much, what it can pay for, what it can't. Just give me a summary. So again, and I'm happy to share this prompt with any of you. And I gave it a tone. I said, be supportive, be practical, think about a helpful colleague who's walking you through it. And let's see what it comes up with. I attached the NOFO. I just dragged it and dropped it and attached it. And it's reading those documents. And it says, here's your plain English desk reference summary. No matter how much I train my AI, it still insists on using emojis. It's like the endless battle between me and my chat GPT, that I'm not an emoji fan, and it just loves emojis. So, but you see, it came through, and it very quickly pulled the name, the funding source, the award amounts, the deadlines, who the grant is for, what is eligible, even things like you have to scrap the old diesel unit, you can't sell it or reuse it, what it's not eligible for. So it took this big long document and it boiled down really nicely. It's providing me a timeline. Now, again, you would want to cross-check and make sure that, don't just count on this timeline. I'm going to go back through and I'm going to make sure that it had some accuracy here. Sometimes I've even challenged it, like, check your work, prove to me that the timeline the application deadline isn't June 1st of 2025. And it'll say, no, the deadline is May 23rd. But you do want to, check some of its information, of course. So that's one example of how you could use it. In this example, this next one, I'll share with you. I have two documents that come from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Commercial Diesel Grant Program. And these are 2 years or 2 cycles of award information. So I don't know if I can open one of them here to show you. So it's a whole listing of the award recipients from 2019 and 2020 and the award recipients from 2021 and 2022. And what I'm going to ask it to do here is review the data and develop an analysis of the average grant amount, the project type. So it's going to take a look through all of this for us when we hit go. It'll read those two PDFs, and I pulled them from the DES site. They had award information available. And it's a little slow. See some more money bags. I had a conversation with it a couple months ago and said, please don't use the money bag emoji, but it's not perfect. So it says the overall average was 122,000. For municipalities, the average was about 65,000. It tells us who's been funded. So 6 towns funded in 2021, 2022. What type of vehicles did they get? What were their award amounts? 2019, 20 through 2020. And then it goes to the private sectors. It's going to tell us what type of projects, and it kind of summaries, it sums up the project types. It provides some notes. So, there were 4 of them that were for loader or grader replacements. 3 of them were school bus replacements. And then other notable takeaways. So it'll continue going through this, and sometimes it'll say, here's what I recommend for if you've got a project like this might fit in with what they're looking for. So suggested strategic fit criteria, for instance. So it's saying, here's some things you might want to think about if your project could be a fit. Super helpful. I'm not going to submit this to DES, but it gets me thinking about the grant opportunity more. Is it a fit for me? It helps to boil it down. It's kind of like a thinking partner at that point. So just some very quick ways that you could use AI. By no means is this all inclusive. There are so many different things you could do with it in the grant world, but I did just want to share those. I think we are right at are over by 1 minute of my 90-minute goal. We did schedule 2 hours for this, but I want to take a pause. And if there are any questions at all, I want to welcome them. Or if you have any thoughts, anything you want to add, I'm going to put my information right here in the chat pod. Feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do to assist you. And certainly, as Lee mentioned, we're going to get you a follow-up copy of this PowerPoint or the presentation, as well as the link to the recording once it's live on our YouTube. But we'd love to see you again at another webinar or another opportunity, and I'll hang out for 30 seconds or so in case there are questions. Thank you all for joining us. Take
Yeah, I'm
care,
not seeing
everyone.
any questions, Marilee, so I think we are good.
Either I put them to sleep or I overeducated them and no questions at all. Take care, everyone. Thanks,
So it
Lee, for your
definitely
help.
takes some time to get used to that, huh?
What's that?
I said it definitely seems like it takes some time to get used to
The AI?
AI.
Yes.
Exactly what you're looking
Um, and honestly, Sean, it's almost addictive in some ways. Like once I started using it, I found so many other ways too. So I always recommend people start kind of small, and you'll be surprised how quickly you start integrating it into your day to day.
for. Wow. All right. Thank you very much.
Good to see you. Take care.
Great job, guys.
Thanks for joining
Really,
us.
really appreciate it.
Awesome. Glad to have you. Take care.
Mhm.
All right, Lee, I think we can go ahead and safely. Yeah, Deanna, I'll send you the link to the webinar we did, and then I'll keep you posted if there's interest to schedule another one. We'll be happy to get you that link as well, but at least get you the past recording and reach out if you have any questions or any interest.
I do have a
I'm
quick
always
question if you still
sure.
have time.
Yeah.
How do you document, for example, I would like to take my resume and throw it into AI and say, okay, I am applying for this job. How would you change this resume? How do you do something like that?
Oh, that's a great thought. And so I haven't tried that, but what you could do, um, with ChatGPT at least, and just because it's what I'm familiar with, you can drag and drop documents into your chat. And what I would do if that were me is I would go out to the job description I'm applying for. I would highlight, like copy it all, and I would paste it into the AI model and say, I'm applying for this title. Below is the full job description. Here is a link to the company's values or page to know more about them. First, please review the company information. Second, please review the job description below. And then third, review my resume attached and rewrite it to fit the job description in the company. I don't know if that answers your
Excellent.
question. And
It does. It does. Thank
yeah,
you very much. So
yeah,
you could
yeah,
slide
good
over
luck.
and drop things right in there. Huh? Okay,
Yeah,
very
drag
good.
and drop it. Yeah,
I've never
absolutely.
used AI, so I think this is going to be fun.
Check it out. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff to do with it. Yeah.
But
Thanks for
thank you so
joining
very
us.
much.
Take care.
Bye bye.
All right, Lee, I'm going to go ahead and log on out. Lee, thanks for hanging out with me.
Thanks, Marilee.